it gets worse is an understatement. Hey everyone, welcome to Ex-Fundie Diaries. My name is Ellie, my pronouns are she, her, and this video is part of an ongoing series called Ex-Fundie Library, where I talk about the harmful Christian books I read growing up. In my last video, I discussed the first half of the Christian romance novel Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. I got lots of requests to talk about the second half as well, so that's what I'll be doing today. This will actually be part 2 of 3, because there is way too much to talk about in only 2 parts. For the sake of time, I won't be giving a recap of part 1, but I'll put that video up in the cards so that if you haven't seen it yet, you can go check that out first. Before we pick up where we left off, I wanted to say thank you for all of the awesome comments on that video. They are kind, they are funny, and they're very insightful. And I wanted to highlight a couple of them that I thought made really good points about redeeming love. This one says, "It's the story of how a 26-year-old virgin abuses and has a hate boner for a trafficking victim who is the age of a high school senior as metaphor for Christ's love. Also, renaming a person to tell them what their new identity is a cult tactic." Those are excellent observations, and what really stood out to me was the part about Angel being the age of a high school senior. I didn't think of it that way, and that really helps put things into perspective. Also, hate boner is the most hilarious and accurate depiction of Michael ever, and it made me laugh out loud when I read it. Another comment points out that Michael nicknaming Angel Mara for bitter is both red pill negging crap and a tactic straight out of the Michael Pearl books. I had to look up the word negging, and according to Wikipedia, it is an act of emotional manipulation whereby a person makes a deliberate backhanded compliment or otherwise flirtatious remark to another person to undermine their confidence and increase their need of the manipulator's approval. I think that is so spot on, and it was also very validating to me that other people were feeling the incel vibes that I was getting from Michael. So thank you again for sharing these awesome observations, and please feel free to keep them coming as we go forward. Once again, I have a very long list of content warnings for this video, and unfortunately, I have to add quite a few. So just like the last time, domestic violence, violence in general, misogyny and sexism, verbal, emotional, spiritual, and psychological abuse, kidnapping, and Stockholm syndrome. And the ones that I need to add are rape and sexual assault, racism and white supremacy, including a discussion of chattel slavery, incest, a forced abortion and sterilization, and pedophilia. I know those added content warnings are extremely sensitive and serious topics, and unfortunately some of them are kind of spread throughout, so I wouldn't be able to do this for all of those topics, but if there is something that's only mentioned in one section, I will try to give an extra verbal content warning right before I talk about that topic. And of course, as always, please feel free to turn this off at any time or to take breaks and come back to it if it's too distressing. That is like the longest list of content warnings I've ever given on a video, and it's just a lot. It's a lot. One last thing to address before I get back into the book. In my last video, I said that Francine Rivers is a good writer, and it's just her messages that are bad. And I must admit, I now feel that I was being a little too generous, and I need to redact that statement. As a writer myself, I hate being critical of people's technical writing abilities, but I have to be honest, this is really bad writing. Way too many adverbs, not enough plot. The book is 464 pages long, and it feels like a rambling soap opera with no apparent destination. In the comments, somebody called it a Christian bodice ripper, someone else called it Fundie incel fanfic, yet another person said it was a suspense thriller novel. I think all of these are very apt descriptions of this wild ride. So let's get back into it. So it's this point in the story that we get introduced to Paul. Paul is Michael's brother-in-law. He was married to Michael's sister, Tessie. Tessie has passed away a couple of years ago, and the clothes that Angel is currently wearing are Tessie's old clothes. And this really pisses Paul off, so that's why I'm telling you that. So Paul has been, I don't really know what he was doing. I think he was maybe looking for gold. It doesn't really matter, but he's back now, and he has a house that is close by to Michael. Michael wants Paul to meet Angel, so that's where we are here. Paul was beginning to look forward to a woman being around. He expected someone like Tess at the hearth, someone quiet and sweet, good-natured and devout. He came in behind Michael, eager to meet her. A slender girl stood before the fire, her back to them. She was wearing a skirt exactly like the one Tess had worn walking the Oregon Trail. The same shirtwaist, too. Odd. He frowned slightly. She bent to her cooking pot, and he was quick to notice she had a nice backside. When she straightened, he noticed her tiny waist and a long, thick golden braid that reached it. So far, so good. So he just undresses her with his eyes right there. That's kind of our first introduction to Paul. When she turned around, Paul felt his stomach drop into his worn boots. He stared in disbelief, but she was staring right back, that high-priced prostitute from paradise. He glanced at Michael and saw him smiling as though she was the sun and moon and all the stars in the heavens. "Paul, I'd like you to meet my wife, Amanda." Paul stared at her and didn't know what to do or say. Michael was standing beside him, waiting, and he knew if he didn't say something nice real soon, things would go from bad to worse. Paul forced a stiff smile. "Sorry to gape at you, ma'am. Michael said you were beautiful." What was Michael doing married to a woman like this one? Did he know she was a prostitute? He couldn't. The man had never set foot in a brothel in his life. He had never had a woman. Not that the chance hadn't been presented often enough. Yes, because as we know, Michael is very hot and all the ladies want him. Against all reason and natural drives, Michael had set his mind to wait for the right one. And now look what he got for all his purity. Angel! What story had the witch concocted? What was she going to do about it? Should he tell Michael now? Michael was looking at him strangely. Angel smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Her eyes were gorgeous blue, but they had become deathly cold. She knew he recognized her, and she was letting him know that she didn't care. And if she didn't care, then it was clear she hadn't married Michael for love. He smiled back, colder than she. "How do you get your claws into him?" Those were his thoughts. So my perception of Paul and his purpose in this story is I think Rivers wants him to contrast with Michael, to show Angel or the reader, see, Michael's actually a really great guy because Paul's even worse. So we're really supposed to hate Paul, I think, and it's supposed to drive us into the arms of Michael, just like Angel. But we cannot forget how abusive and horrible Michael is, no matter how awful Paul is as well. Paul headed for Angel. She looked up and down again, and this time there was no mistake. She was wearing Tessie's clothes. He felt hot fury all over. How could Michael give them to her? He walked up just as she finished shaking out his worn long johns. He expected her to turn around, but she didn't. She knew he was there. He was sure of it. She was just ignoring him. "Hello, Angel," he said, thinking that might bring her about quick enough. She turned, but her expression was cool and self-possessed. "Angel," he said again. "That's your real name, isn't it? Not Amanda. Correct me if I'm wrong." "I guess I'm found out, aren't I?" She draped his long johns over the line Michael had put up for her. "Should I remember you?" I love how she's literally washing his clothes for him, and he is not showing very much gratitude. Brazen hussy. I suppose faces all begin to look alike in your business, and everything else. Ooh, that's a good comeback. So Angel does not tell Paul that Michael knows about her, and it just bothers him so much, and he gets more and more mad about it. And then he starts having really violent thoughts about her. You don't care about anything, do you? Should I? Paul wanted to grab her and swing her around so he could lay his fist into her arrogant face. You're just asking for it. And I'm going to skip over a bunch of paragraphs because it's more of the same. And then on the next page, yet more violent thoughts. Furious, Paul slammed the next log into place. He looked back across the yard at her. She stood in the doorway of Michael's cabin, in Tessie's clothes. He wanted to go over there and rip them off of her. He wanted to beat her and chase her right out of this valley. So he decides he can't take it anymore. He has to tell Michael. And Michael says, yeah, I know. And that makes Paul even madder. So Angel decides to go back into town. And this time she's feeling conflicted because that Stockholm syndrome is really setting in and she is having some feelings for Michael, but she's still holding on to the idea of freedom, and ultimately she wants to demand her money back from the Duchess. She gets her perfect opportunity to go back into town when Paul is going to head in for some supplies. So Michael lets him borrow his wagon, and as Paul is leaving to go into town, Angel runs after him. Content warning: sexual assault and rape. I'll put the time code on the screen if you would like to skip this part. Paul heard her call. He drew rein and waited, wondering what she wanted. Angel was flushed and breathless when she reached him. I need a ride back to paradise. He covered his surprise with a curt laugh. So you're running out on him already? She smiled derisively. Were you hoping I would stay? Get on up, he said, not even reaching out a hand to help her. Thanks, she said dryly, and climbed onto the wagon seat with him. Paul had spent the better part of last night wondering what to do about Michael's soiled bride, and here she had solved the problem for him. He hadn't thought she would leave so easily. No bribe, no threats. She was going of her own free will. Paul glanced at her as she dabbed her face with the hem of Tessie's shawl. It was all he could do not to tear it off of her. So he's really rude to her the entire drive. He purposefully drives over potholes so that it will jar her and cause her to be uncomfortable. He doesn't give her any food except for a half-eaten apple that he throws into the dirt. And he enjoys seeing her in pain and feeling hungry and being uncomfortable. And then this happens. Yanking the reins, he pulled the wagon off the road and stopped. She stiffened, wary. Why are you stopping? You owe me something for the ride. She went very still. What did you have in mind? What have you got? He wanted to rub her raw. I guess you figure when someone does you a favor, you don't owe them anything, right? Well, that's rich, considering that she washed his long johns for him a couple pages back. Is that not a favor? What did he give her? She looked away. He caught her arm tightly, and she looked at him again, her face pale. He glared into her cynical blue eyes. Well, you do. You owe me for this ride. He let her go abruptly. Angel felt the spiraling begin inside her, going down like water in a sinkhole. She had forgotten that everything costs something. She let her breath out and tilted her head slightly. Well, we might as well get it done. She got down from the wagon seat. Paul asks, what do you figure on doing? Whatever you want, mister. She took off the shawl and draped it over the side of the wagon. Well? Her smile mocked him. So I'm not going to read the rest of this, but he grabs her arm, he pulls her off the side of the road, and he rapes her. And she is so traumatized that she is shaking afterwards, and she vomits. And the reason why I wanted to read her reaction to him demanding sex to pay for this ride is because going forward in the book, she feels guilty for this moment. She blames herself, and Rivers starts to lie to us as the audience because she will start to say that Angel wanted it, that she did it on purpose to hurt Michael or to get back at Paul for being mean to her. But that's not true. Angel is being coerced. She does not want to do this at all. This is not an example of consent. She is anxious, she is afraid, she is resigned because she needs to get into town and this is her only option. Also, she probably thinks that if she doesn't give in to what he's demanding, he could beat her up, he could kill her. And we, the reader, know that Paul has all these violent thoughts in his head. He's a dangerous guy, and I'm sure that Angel can sense that. She has a lot of experience with a lot of abusive men. So I'm sure that she can see it in his eyes, and she can sense it in his body language and in what he's saying, that it would be physically unsafe for her to say no. No is not an option for her here. And that's why it's rape and sexual assault. So I wanted to make that really clear because going forward in the book, Rivers makes a big fucking deal about this moment, and it's framed as a sin. That's just victim blaming. It's super wrong. And it's just another reason why this book is so damaging and harmful and horrible. So when Angel gets into town, she discovers that the palace has burned down and the Duchess has left. But the Silver Dollar Saloon is still there, and the owner, Murphy, allows her to work there as long as he gets a percentage of her profits. The days ran together, nothing much had changed. Instead of the Duchess, Angel now had Murphy. Instead of McGowan, there was the more manageable Max. Her room was smaller and her clothing less grand. The food was tolerable and plentiful. Men were still the same. Angel sat on the bed, leg crossed and swinging back and forth as a young miner undressed. His hair was still wet and slicked back, and he smelled strongly of harsh soap. He didn't have much to say, which was fine, because she didn't want to listen. This one wouldn't take long. Closing down her emotions, closing down her mind, she went to work. The door crashed open, and someone yanked the young man away. Angel drew in a sharp breath as she recognized the face of the man above her. "Michael!" She pushed herself up. "Oh, Michael!" The young man thudded on the floor. He came to his feet. "What are you doing?" Swearing, he lunged. Michael hit him and sent him back against the wall. Hauling him up, he hit him again and sent him flying backwards through the open door to crash and sag against the outer wall. Michael snatched up the miner's things and heaved them out on top of him. Kicking the door shut, he turned. Angel was so relieved at the sight of him, she wanted to fall at his feet, but one look at his face and she shrank back. "Get dressed." He didn't wait for her to move as he grabbed up her discarded clothing and tossed it at her. "Now!" Heart pounding, she fumbled with the clothing, frantically trying to think of a way to escape him. Oh God. So a couple sentences ago, she was so relieved she wanted to fall at his feet, and now she's trying to think of a way to escape him. This is such a toxic dynamic. Before she was fully clothed, he yanked her off the bed, opened the door, and shoved her into the corridor. He hadn't even allowed her to put her shoes on. Murphy was coming. "What do you think you're doing? I told you to wait downstairs. That man paid. You can wait your turn. Get out of my way." Murphy spread his feet and balled his fists. "You think you can get by me?" Angel had seen Murphy in action before and was sure Michael was no match for him. "Michael, please." Michael shoved her roughly to one side and stepped in front of her. Murphy came at him, but Michael moved so fast Murphy was down before he knew what hit him. Of course, because Michael is good at everything. He's so strong and handsome and amazing and super good at fighting because he's a super manly man. Michael caught her wrist and pulled her along again. I wish this man would keep his hands off her wrist. It seems to be his go-to move, and it's really bugging me. Michael let go and she fell against the wall. Murphy came at him again, and this time Michael sent him straight down the stairs. I feel like they could have just talked this through, to be honest. He could have just been like, "Hey man, this is actually my wife and there's been a mix-up here." But he doesn't even try to explain. He just starts taking out all his anger on this other guy. When Michael bent over, Angel drew back from him. "Get up!" he bellowed. She didn't dare disobey. He took her arm and shoved her ahead of him. "Keep walking, and don't stop." Max charged Michael when they reached the bottom of the stairs. 2 more men came at him, and he pushed her out of the way just before they hit him. Frantic, she looked for something to use as a weapon to help, but Michael wasn't down long enough. He kicked one man off of him and was on his feet. She stared, mouth agape, as he fought. He stood his ground, punching hard and fast as the other men came at him. Swinging around, he brought one foot up straight into a man's face. She had never seen anyone fight the way he did. He looked as though he had been doing it all his life instead of plowing furrows and planting corn. He hit square and he hit hard, and those he hit stayed down. After a few minutes, the men weren't so eager to come at him. Michael stood ready, eyes blazing. "Come on then," he grated, daring them. "Who else wants to get between me and my wife? Come on!" No one moved. Kicking a turned table out of his way, Michael strode toward Angel. He didn't look anything like the man she had come to know in the valley. "I told you to keep walking!" He grabbed her arm and swung her toward the doors. His wagon was right outside. Michael caught her up in his arms and tossed her onto the high seat. Tossed her? She had no time to think of escape before he was beside her. Oh my God, so he's kidnapping her again. She wants to escape. That's what Rivers is telling us. Twice! It said she was looking for an escape. So he's literally fucking kidnapping her. Again. He took the reins and snapped them. She had to hang on for dear life. The pace he set was grueling. He didn't slow until they were several miles out of paradise, and when he did, it was out of care for the horses and not for her. Angel was afraid even to look at him. She was afraid to say a word. She had never seen him like this before, even that one time when he had lost his temper in the barn. This was not the quiet, patient man she thought she knew. This was a stranger, bent on vengeance. Michael wiped blood from his lip. "Make me understand, Angel. Tell me why. Let me off this wagon. You're coming home with me. So you can kill me?" Oh God. Ugh. I don't even want to say this out loud, but we are trying to highlight the horribleness of this book, so I'm gonna say it. Jesus, are you listening to her? Why do you give me this stupid, stubborn woman? Let me off! Not a chance. You're not skipping out of this. We have some things to settle. This next scene is what I find to be the most chilling in a suspense thriller kind of way. It is the most terrifying scene to put in the middle of a love story. The look in his eyes was so full of violence, she jumped. She hit heavily and rolled. Regaining her breath, she clambered to her feet and ran. Michael drew back hard on the reins and veered the wagon off the road. He jumped down and started after her. "Angel!" He could hear her footsteps fleeing into the woods. "It's getting dark. Stop running before you break your neck." Maybe she'd stop running if you stopped chasing her. She didn't stop. She tripped over a root and fell so hard she knocked her wind out. She knocked her wind out. It's a weird way to say that. She lay gasping on the ground and could hear Michael close behind. He was walking fast, slapping branches out of his way until he spotted her. Oh, this is so scary. I'm feeling anxious just reading this. I hate being chased. I hate being chased. Angel scrambled to her feet and ran from him in terror, heedless of the branches that slapped her face. Michael cut her off and caught her shoulders. Stumbling, she took him down with her. He turned his body so he landed first and tried to roll her. She kicked and twisted, fighting for freedom. Flinging her onto her back, he pinned her down. When she tried to claw his face, he caught her wrists and held them against the ground. That's enough. This scene is personally very, very triggering for me. I have personally been in scenarios like this with my own violent and abusive dad, and I have witnessed them in my family. This is hard to read, but I think it's important to read it. She lay panting for breath, her eyes enormous. Getting his breath back, he yanked her to her feet. The minute he loosened his hold, she tried to run again. He swung her back and took a blow, meaning that she hit him. He almost hit her back, but he knew if he hit her once, he wouldn't stop. Let's just let that sink in for a moment. Okay, he let go of her, but each time she tried to flee, he swung her back. Finally, she attacked, slapping, hitting, and kicking at him. He blocked her blows, all without retaliating. Wow, what a saint he is, taking all of her self-defense and not retaliating, even though the guy won't stop kidnapping her over and over again. She keeps trying to get away, and he keeps kidnapping her. There is nothing redeeming about this fucking book. It just gets worse and worse. When she sagged, Michael pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. Her whole body was shaking violently. There's that phrase again. Remember the last time we heard shaking violently? It was when Michael had sex for the first time. So he gets to shake violently from pleasure. She has to shake violently from the terror that he inflicts on her. Great. He could feel the fear radiating from her. And rightly so. His rage frightened him. If he had hit her back once, he would have killed her. I'm going to read that again. His rage frightened him. If he had hit her back once, he would have killed her. And then on the next page, it reiterates the fact that he almost killed her. He prepared himself for anything on the way to paradise. But when he walked into that room and saw for himself what she was doing, he had almost lost all reason. If he hadn't seen her eyes or heard the way she said his name, he would have killed them both. But he had seen and heard it. For one brief, unguarded instant, he'd known what she really felt. Relief. Relief so profound it stopped him cold. But it didn't mean the instinctive rage at her betrayal wasn't still there, bubbling just below the surface. But again, it's not a betrayal. He kidnapped her. I feel like a broken record at this point saying this over and over again, but it's really important to say he kidnapped her. They're not even legally married. And Christians make a huge deal about marriage, right? Legal marriage. So this is so hypocritical. The next couple pages is just him shaming her. And then it says, "Why did you go back? I just don't get it." She closed her eyes, searching for a good enough reason. She could find none and swallowed hard. "To get my gold," she said bleakly. Admitting it out loud made her feel small and hollow. Why? Why does that make you feel small and hollow? To go back and get what you've earned that was kept from you. Ah, right, because she's a woman. "What for?" Michael asked. "I want a little cabin in the woods." "You've already got one." She could hardly speak past the lump of pain in her chest. She pressed her hand against it. "I want to be free, Michael. Just once in my whole life. Free." Her voice broke. She bit her lip and clutched at the side of the wagon seat so hard the wood dug into her hands. Michael's face softened. The anger vanished, but not the hurt, not the sorrow. "You are free. You just don't know it yet." So ridiculous. So ridiculous. If you're wondering why I'm wearing a completely different outfit now in this video, it's because I ended up having to take a break from this awful book, but I'm back a couple days later and I'm ready to tackle more. Once they're back to Michael's cabin after he has officially kidnapped her for the second time, This is the part in the story where she really starts to blame herself for what Paul did to her on the way into town. And unfortunately, it's just page after page of her beating herself up and truly believing that it was her fault. And I think that the way that Rivers has written this is really cruel to survivors of rape and sexual assault, because there's no characters around Angel telling her, no, it's not your fault. Instead, we have Michael agreeing with her and reflecting back to her what she's feeling, which is untrue and super harmful. Angel sat in silent torment. She struggled against the emotions tearing at her: remorse, guilt, confusion. Nothing could be the same. Whatever might have grown between her and Michael was ruined. She knew that. The moment Paul had used her, she had thrown her last chance away. I did it to myself. I did it to myself. Paul's words came back. You're not even worth 2 bits. It was true. She was a prostitute, and that's all she would ever be. It hadn't even taken a day for her to fall right back into her old ways. But what happened with Paul was not prostitution. It was assault. But of course, in evangelical fundamentalism, all the sexual sin is the same. It's all lumped together. Fundies are obsessed with sex. Any sex outside of a legal marriage between a cis man and a cis woman is seen as sexual sin. And I don't even believe that sex work is sin. Well, to be honest, I don't even believe in sin anymore. But what I mean is, I don't think that it is wrong for people to engage in sex work, but it's definitely not what happened with Paul. Paul raped her, and it is not her fault. And I wish that someone could tell potential young survivors reading this that it was not their fault. She held herself and rocked back and forth. Why was I ever born? Why? She stared down at her hands. For this? She could feel the filth of her trade covering them. Her whole body was fouled, inside and out. Michael had taken her straight out of the abyss and offered her a chance, and she had thrown it away. Then he came again and took her straight from her soiled bed to his home, and staying true to her own stupidity, she had spent the whole morning cleaning the cabin and had not once thought to cleanse herself. So now she's going to take it a step further. Instead of just internally flogging herself, she is going to physically self-harm because of her feelings of shame. Searching frantically, she found soap and ran for the creek. Stripping off her clothing and heedlessly casting it aside, she waded in. The icy air and water bit her flesh, but she didn't care. All she wanted was to be clean, to wash it all away. Everything from as far back as she could remember, maybe right to the very moment of her conception. Michael comes back in from the barn where he's been stewing in his feelings, and he sees that Angel is gone. The cabin was neat, a cozy fire was burning. The table was set and his breakfast ready. Only Angel was missing. Michael swore for the first time in years. He's so pure, he hasn't sworn in so long. Let her go back. I don't care. I'm sick of the struggle. He kicked the pot free of the iron bar. How many times am I supposed to go after her and bring her back? He sat for a while in the willow chair, but his anger just kept building. He would go find her again, and this time he would give her a good piece of his mind. He would tell her if she wanted to leave so badly, he'd even give her a ride back. Slamming out of the cabin, he stood outside, arms akimbo, wondering which way she had run off this time. He scanned the landscape and, with some surprise, spotted her standing naked in the creek. He strode down the bank. What are you doing? If you wanted a bath, why didn't you tote water to the house and warm it? In a sudden, uncharacteristic act of modesty, she turned her back to him, trying to hide herself. Go away. He stripped off his jacket. Come on out of there. You'll catch pneumonia. If you want a bath that badly, I'll tote the water. Go away, she screamed, dropping to her knees and hunching over. Don't be a fool. He waded in and caught hold of her, yanking her to her feet. Her fists were full of gravel. Her breasts and belly were raw from scrubbing. What have you been doing to yourself? I have to wash. You didn't give me the chance. You've washed enough. He tried to put the jacket around her, and she pulled away. Michael grabbed her roughly. Will you be finished when you've stripped your skin off? When you've bled? Is that it? Do you think doing this to yourself will make you clean? It doesn't work that way, he said through gritted teeth. She blinked and sat down slowly, the icy water swirling around her waist. No, I guess not, she said softly. Come back inside, he said, and helped her up. She came without resistance this time, stumbling as they reached the bank. When she bent for her clothing, he pulled her along without them. Half shoving her into the cabin, he slammed the door. Man, so he's always grabbing her wrist and he's always making her walk around naked. Yanking a blanket from the bed, he threw it to her. Sit down by the fire. Angel pulled the blanket around her shoulders and sat. She didn't raise her head. Glancing back at her, Michael poured her a cup of coffee. Drink this. She did as he told her. You'll be lucky if you don't get sick. What are you trying to do? Make me feel guilty you went back to prostitution? Make me feel guilty for dragging you out of that brothel again? I'm sorry, what? She was so full of shame, she was self-harming. It has nothing to do with you, Michael. Not everything is about you, dude. You think that the world revolves around you. Ugh, the narcissism. I do not like it. No, she said quietly. He didn't want to pity her. He wanted to shake her until her teeth fell out. He wanted to kill her. Damn, so much violence, so many violent thoughts. Murderous thoughts. God, I could kill her and be glad of it. You shouldn't have come for me, she said dully. You should never have come near me in the first place. That's right, blame me. Maybe she was right. He felt sick. Clenching his hand, he glared down at her. I said vows, and I'm going to stick by them no matter how much they're choking me now. Oh my God, so dramatic. She looked up at him with bleak eyes. You don't have to, she shook her head. It'll work. I'll make it work. Didn't you promise, Lord? He's praying now. Or was I imagining it? Was she right all along and it was just sexual attraction? I mean, yeah, you didn't know her. You still don't, really. You're only fooling yourself, Angel said. You just don't understand. I never should have been born. He laughed derisively. Self-pity. You're drowning in it, aren't you? On the next page, she tells Michael, Mama's parents were decent people in a good neighborhood. They wouldn't take her in, not with an illegitimate child. Even her church turned her away. The blanket fell open and Michael stared down at the reddened marks on her skin. There were lines of red where she had torn at her own flesh. Jesus, why are you doing this to me? Again, Michael, not about you. It was easier retreating into anger than seeing into her tortured soul. Wow, her tortured soul. I mean, she is extremely traumatized. He doesn't want the true her. He can't even stand to hold space for her trauma. And she tells him right now, her mother died when she was 8 and she was trafficked. She was sold to this pedophile named Duke. Michael shut his eyes. She looked up at him. Of course he was repulsed. What man wouldn't be at the thought of a child fornicating with a grown man? That was just the beginning, she said dully, lowering her head, unable to look at him. You can't even begin to imagine what happened from there. Things done to me. Things I did. She didn't tell him it was a matter of survival. What did it matter? She had chosen to obey. He looked at her through his tears. You think you're to blame for all of it, don't you? I guess at least Rivers has the decency to make him disagree with the idea that she, as an 8-year-old, was somehow to blame for what happened to her. But he still blames her for so many other things that are not her fault. And he still kidnapped her. We just need to keep that in mind. He leaned toward her, but she drew back, hugging herself even more tightly and looking away. "Amanda, we'll make it through this," he said. "We will. I swear a covenant with you." "No, we won't make it. Just take me back." When he shook his head, she pleaded, "Please, I don't belong here with you. Find someone else." "Better than you mean?" Her face was white as death, her pain stark and raw. "Yes." "Do you think I'm such a saint?" he said hoarsely. Only moments ago he had denied love and God himself, and even longed to kill his own wife. Yeah. I like how he's not specifying to her why he's not a saint. What was the difference in murder by hand or thought? His fleshly nature had relished thoughts of retribution, even lusted for it. He went down on his knees and held her shoulders. "I should have run all the way to paradise," he said quickly. "I should have waited for Paul to come home with his tail between his legs." She raised her head and looked him straight in the eyes, wanting to end it quickly, once and for all. "I gave him sex, just to pay for the ride back." The pain of those words hit him hard, but he didn't give up on her. Michael lifted her chin. "Look at me, Amanda. I'm never taking you back." "Not ever. We belong together." I know that's supposed to be comforting, but it's kind of creepy in this horror story. He puts the ring on her finger, he cradles her creepily, and then he kissed her hair and held her. It was ironic how close he felt to her now, closer than he ever had before. The fire crackled softly, and a steady warmth built within Michael as he held his young wife, and sometime within the space of a shuddering sigh, he ceased thinking of her as Angel, the harlot he loved and who had betrayed him, and saw her instead as the nameless child who had been broken and was still lost. So not only does she blame herself, but she also tries to make it up to him. She worked hard to make it up to Michael. When she finished with her own chores, she sought him out and asked for more to do. If he plowed, she walked behind him and pulled up the rocks, toting them to the stone wall growing between the fields. When he downed trees, she hacked off the branches with a hatchet, blah, 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 etc. And then I just had to point this little part out because it totally made me laugh. These are Michael's thoughts. How was Angel any different from Hosea's wife, Gomer, a child of prostitution, an adulteress? Was Gomer ever redeemed by her husband's love? Christ had redeemed the world. But what about Gomer, Lord? What about Angel? What about my wife? So we had to take it a step further from calling him Michael Hosea. Like, that wasn't enough to make sure that everyone was totally clear that this is supposed to be based off of the story of Hosea and Gomer from the Bible. He then had to completely spell it out for everyone in this paragraph so that there is no doubt in anyone's mind what this book is about. And I love these questions. Was Gomer ever redeemed? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. And then Michael randomly has this realization that his kidnapping victim has been wearing his dead sister's old clothes this whole time, and that's not very nice, and he should get her some actual real clothes. So he decides to take her on this trip to Sacramento so that she can pick out some fabric and have some dresses of her own. They get to Sacramento, they pick out the fabric, and then Michael wants to go to church. Angel hadn't realized he intended to go to church until he was almost to the door and she heard singing. Yeah, because he's never telling her where they're going or what's happening. He's just always dragging her along and then surprising her at the last minute, which I suppose, again, is supposed to be like a metaphor for God. We don't know where he's taking us, but we should just always trust no matter what. She pulled her hand from his and shook her head. "You go ahead, I'll wait out here." Michael smiled. "Give it a try, for me." He took her hand again. When they went inside, her heart pounded so fast she thought she was choking on it. She has a panic attack and she runs out of the church, and then Michael follows her. "Are you all right?" Michael said. She hadn't expected him to follow her. "I'm fine," she lied. "Would you just sit by me?" She turned and looked up at him. "No." "You don't have to take part in the service. The only way you'll get me back inside that place is to drag me. Amanda, I haven't been in a church in months. I need fellowship. I didn't say you had to leave." She wanted to explain, but when she turned, he was already disappearing into the church. She felt bereft. They were singing again, loud enough to be heard clearly outside. "Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war." It was a war against God and Michael and the whole world. After church is over, Michael says, "I'm worried about you." "Why? Are you afraid if you don't save my soul, I'll go to hell?" He probably does think that. He probably does think that she'll go to hell if she doesn't accept Christ as her savior. When I was reading this in preparation for filming, I realized that they are an unequally yoked couple. You know that whole thing about being equally yoked? How Christians are only supposed to marry other Christians, that you need to avoid missionary dating, where a Christian will try to evangelize a non-Christian by dating them. By those standards, Michael is sinning. He is missionary dating Angel. Actually, he's missionary marrying her. Actually, that's not true because they didn't even get married. He's missionary kidnapping her. I just think this whole book is just so ridiculous. It's just so ridiculous. It doesn't even live up to the standards that it pretends to. Okay, so this next part, I need to give another content warning. Racism and white supremacy and chattel slavery. I do not think that it would be appropriate for me to read this section out loud, but I do think that I should summarize it because I think people at least need to know that it's in here. We find out in this section that Michael's family owns a plantation, the biggest one in the district, apparently, and his parents are enslavers. The way that Michael brings this up is really casual and out of the blue, and he frames it in a really weird and insensitive way. It's after church, they stop by a stream to have some food, and then just super randomly, with no context, he tells Angel that she's not the only one who has been called names before. He says that his father has called him names before. And it's basically because he didn't agree with the way that his father was treating the people that are enslaved by his family. To be clear, it was not the slavery that Michael had a problem with. It was what he saw as his father's extra harsh treatment of the enslaved people. He tells Angel that when he was a child, his mother told him that the people they were enslaving were their people and that they needed to take care of them. And then his father did something particularly gruesome, and he says that his mother disagreed with it, but that she never said a word against him. And then there's some other weird shit that Michael says in the next couple paragraphs that I'm not going to summarize. It's basically just white saviorism and stereotypes. And then he says, "Amanda, my father wasn't all bad. I don't want you to think that of him. He loved the land and he did take care of his people." And after he finishes his speech about his father, Angel says, "You must have hated him." And he says, "No. I loved him, and I'm grateful he was my father." This is really, really fucked up. And Rivers did not have to write this part of Michael's backstory. I mean, she didn't have to write any of this book, and I don't think that she should have. But what I mean is, this has nothing to do with the rest of the story. So it just feels like a way to slip some racist propaganda into the middle of this book. And in case anyone is wondering if in 2022 Rivers regrets having this section in her book, she doesn't. I watched an interview from last week where Rivers was asked, is there anything in this book that you regret writing? And she said no.
I was going to ask you if there's something that you wrote 30 years ago that you would change differently now about this story.
No.
That's a good answer.
No, I think that after I was able to put in the conversion scene, which was not in the original, I wanted that in there. I don't think I'd change anything. It's really God's story. It's not mine.
In the back of the book, there is a note from Francine Rivers that talks about why she wrote the book. And it says, writing Redeeming Love was a form of worship for me. Everything in Redeeming Love was a gift from the Lord. Plot, characters, theme. None of it is mine to claim. I think that really speaks for itself. I don't really have much to add about this, other than this is extremely harmful and wrong. And I mostly just wanted to talk about this section to expose it. Because in all my research that I've done about this book, no one seems to be talking about it. But it's there in a book about the love of God. And again, it's so casually mentioned and inappropriately framed. A couple paragraphs later, we are back to evangelical erotica. Michael kisses Angel and she gets turned on for the first time. Without thinking, Angel put her hand over his, moved by his sadness. His smile made her heart twist. "Oh, beloved," he said, "your walls are coming down." He drew her into his arms and lay back with her in the grass. Rolling her beneath him, he kissed her gently at first, then more roughly. She felt a quickening inside her, a soft, warm curling in her belly. Yet she felt neither threatened nor used. When he drew back slightly, she saw the look in his eyes. "Oh, sometimes I forget what I'm waiting for," he said huskily. They begin traveling back home and it starts raining. And they come across this family named the Altmans, who are on the side of the road because their wagon has broken down. Michael helps the dad of the family fix the wagon, while Angel gets to know the mom, the oldest daughter named Miriam, and the rest of the kids. They're a very large family, and Miriam is a very parentified 16-year-old. And I don't remember much about this story at all, but I have to wonder if 16-year-old me felt a kinship with Miriam. I would guess so. She's very much a goody two-shoes. She is very devoted to God and to her parents, and she takes all her parentification in stride and convinces herself that she loves it. "Thank the Lord you came when you did," Miriam said. "Papa was having trouble with that wheel, and Mama is just about done in." She took the blanket off herself and settled it around the 4 children. "Would you watch over the children, Mrs. Hosea? Mama's been ill for the past 300 miles, and she shouldn't be out in the rain." She jumped down from the wagon before Angel could protest. Angel looked at the children again and saw they were all staring at her with wide, curious eyes. A few moments later, Miriam returned with her mother. She was a worn, dark-haired woman with stooped shoulders and shadowed eyes. "Mama," Miriam said, an arm around her, "this is Mrs. Hosea." The woman smiled warmly and nodded. "Elizabeth," she said with a smile. "God bless you, Mrs. Hosea." Tears gathered in the tired eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Mr. Altman appeared at the back of the wagon, rain running off his hat. "Is everything all right, John?" Elizabeth said. "It'll be good for a ways." He tipped the brim of his hat to Angel as Elizabeth made the introduction. "We're much obliged to you and your husband, ma'am. I was almost done in until your husband came." He looked to his wife again. "Mr. Hosea's invited us to winter at his place." "I said yes. We'll head for Oregon in spring." Once again, Michael is making all of these decisions without even telling Angel, let alone asking her how she feels about it. He has just invited this super huge family to stay the winter in their tiny little cabin before they keep heading to Oregon. Like, what a dick move. But that's patriarchy. He's Angel's authority, so he gets to make the decisions. Oh, Elizabeth said, the relief clearly apparent. Angel's lips parted. Winter at Michael's? 9 people in a 15 by 15 foot cabin? Elizabeth touched her and she jumped. She sat stunned as the woman thanked her before John lifted her out. The boys and girls followed, then Miriam, who touched her shoulder in passing and flashed her a warm, excited smile. Teeth gritted, Angel sat huddled in her blanket in the back of the wagon, wondering what on earth Michael thought he was going to do with all these people. He climbed into the seat, soaked to the skin, and she handed him the spare blanket as they set off again. We'll let them have the cabin, he said. The cabin? Where are we supposed to sleep? In the barn. We'll be comfortable and warm. Why don't they sleep in the barn? You built the cabin. She didn't much like the idea of sleeping anywhere but in that nice snug bed with the fire close by. They haven't slept in a house in over 9 months. And that woman's sick. He nodded again. I've been thinking. There's a good strip of land bordering Paul's. Maybe I can talk the Altmans into staying. It'd be a good thing having another family in the valley. He glanced at her with a smile. You could use women friends around. Before they head home to the cabin, they have to stay another night out on the road. And the Altmans invite Michael and Angel to sleep in their tent. And understandably, Angel does not feel comfortable with this. But Michael thinks it's no big deal, and he's super patronizing to Angel about it. Michael, she said, searching for words to convince him they should sleep in the wagon and not in the tent with the Altmans. He reached out and pulled her close, kissing her soundly. Then he turned her back toward the tent, saying next to her ear, Sooner or later, you'll learn that there are people in the world who don't want to use you. Now, buck up your courage and go back in there and get to know a few. Wow. He is really something. They go into the tent with the Altmans, and Angel is just observing them and having a lot of thoughts. Angel's eyes came to rest on Miriam's sleeping face. This girl was a new entity. Angel hadn't known many good girls, good is italicized. Those on the docks had been warned away by their mothers. Sally had said once that good girls were dull and critical, and that's why when they grew up and married, their husbands frequented brothels. Miriam was neither dull nor critical. She had poked good-humored fun at her father all evening while seeing to her ailing mother. Her sisters and brothers clearly adored her. When it was time for the children to settle down, it was Miriam who tucked them in and prayed with them quietly while the men talked. Miriam had said to her, I'd like to be friends. Angel closed her eyes. Her head ached. What would she and Miriam have to talk about? She hadn't a clue, but it seemed she was going to be faced with it. And apparently Angel is not just fascinated with Miriam, she is fascinated with the entire Altman family. The Altmans fascinated Angel. They all liked each other. John Altman was clearly in charge and would tolerate no disrespect or rebellion. But it was clear he was not held in fear by his wife and children. What if they did decide to stay in the valley? Angel massaged her throbbing temples. What did she have in common with them? Especially a young, doe-eyed virgin. When she had blurted out her past profession and how she and Michael had met, she had fully expected the girl to be shocked and leave her alone. The last thing she expected was that look of questioning concern and an offer of friendship. Okay, content warning for this next part. Forced abortion and forced sterilization. This has to do with more of Angel's backstory. Angel felt movement beside her and opened her eyes against the pain in her head. Ruthie, that's the littlest Altman, snuggled against her, seeking warmth in her sleep. Angel touched the smooth pink cheek. and suddenly she saw Duke's enraged face swimming before her eyes. She felt the slap across her face again. "I told you to take precautions." She could feel him grabbing her by her hair as he dragged her up from the bed so that his face was right in hers. "The first time was easy," he said through his teeth. "This time I'm going to make sure you never get pregnant again." And I don't think I need to read the description of it because it's kind of graphic, but Duke forces an abortion on her and a sterilization so that she is not able to get pregnant again. There is almost nothing that Rivers does not subject onto this poor main character. She just hurls trauma after trauma after trauma onto her. And I was talking to my sibling Annie about this, and they pointed out how it's such an exaggerated, dramatic backstory. Like, it's so traumatic, it's almost unbelievable. But the reason for that is to contrast between a life with Jesus and a life without. If you have Jesus in your life, it's going to be wonderful and amazing. And yes, your problems won't completely go away, but kind of, because you have the love and peace and joy of Jesus, regardless of your circumstances. But a life without Jesus means that you are just going to be beaten and battered and bruised by life. So there's definitely an agenda here. Also, the fact that it involves an abortion, a forced abortion, definitely fits into broader evangelical fundamentalist propaganda. "Can't sleep?" Michael whispered. She shook her head. "Turn to your side." When she did, he drew her back against him, tucking her into his body. The child shifted, snuggling deeper into the quilts and pressing into Angel's stomach. "You've got a friend," Michael murmured. Angel put her arm around Ruth and closed her eyes. Michael put his arm around both of them. "Ew, get your arm off of this little child that you don't even know." Actually, it's kind of creepy that Angel's snuggling with her at all, because she also doesn't know her. God, no boundaries. There are no boundaries here. They're sleeping in the same tent and they're snuggling this little child who is a literal stranger to them. Oh my God, this is wild. "Maybe we'll have one like her someday," he said against her ear. Angel stared into the fire in despair. They get back home, they settle the Altman family in the cabin, and they move out to the barn. And of course, more evangelical erotica. The rains came day after day. After the first few nights, Angel found comfort in the sounds of the owl in the rafters and the soft stirring of mice in the hay. Ew. Michael kept her warm. Sometimes he would explore her body, rousing alien sensations that unnerved her. It is through his redeeming love that she is starting to get turned on when he does stuff to her. The Altmans help out with chores on the farm, and then in the evening they all have dinner together. Following supper, it was the Altman family custom to have devotions. John frequently asked Michael to read the Bible. The children were bright and full of questions. If God created Adam and Eve, why did he let them sin? Did God really want them running around Eden naked, even in winter? If there was only Adam and Eve, who'd their children marry? Excellent questions. Eyes twinkling, John settled back to smoke his pipe while Elizabeth tried to answer the endless questions. I love how these questions are just like a fun little game to them. Oh, these children and their questions. No worries, we'll indoctrinate them so well they won't even care eventually. Angel never joined in the discussions. Even when Miriam asked her what she thought, she shrugged it off or turned the question back on the girl. Then, one evening, Ruthie went straight to the heart of the matter. "Don't you believe in God?" Unsure how to respond, Angel said, "My mother was Catholic." Andrew's mouth fell open. "Brother Bartholomew said they worship idols." Elizabeth blushed bright red at his comment, and John coughed. Andrew apologized. No need, Angel said. My mother didn't worship any idols that I remember, but she prayed a lot. Not that it ever did her any good. What'd she pray for? Irrepressible Ruthie asked. Deliverance. Determined not to become part of a religious discussion, she took up the materials Michael had purchased for her new clothing. There was still silence in the cabin that made Angel's skin prickle. What's deliverance mean? Ruthie asked. We'll talk about it later. Elizabeth hushed her. Right now, you children have schoolwork to do. She got up and took out the children's school books. Homeschooling. Angel looked up after a moment and saw Michael's gentle gaze on her. Her heart fluttered strangely. She wished for the cool, quiet darkness of the barn, and no one noticing her, not even this man who had come to matter entirely too much. She returned her studious attention to the cloth in her lap. How should she start? Never having made her own clothing before, she didn't know how to begin. She kept thinking of all the money Michael had spent and was afraid to cut into it and ruin it. You look glum. Miriam grinned. Don't you like to sew? Ugh, she is insufferable. And I hate that I can see 16-year-old me in her. Oh boy. Angel could feel the color mounting in her cheeks. She was humiliated by her own ignorance and inexperience. Of course, Elizabeth and Miriam would know exactly what to do. Any decent girl, decent is italicized, would be able to make a shirtwaist and skirt. Angel is just surrounded by people and situations that remind her how much of a failure she is by evangelical fundamentalist standards of womanhood. Miriam suddenly looked aggrieved, as though she realized she had drawn attention where she shouldn't have. She gave Angel a tentative smile. I don't enjoy it much myself. Mama is the seamstress in our family. I'd love to help you, Elizabeth volunteered. You've done enough already, Angel said roughly. Miriam brightened. Oh, let Mama do it for you, Amanda. She loves to sew, and she hasn't had much to work with over the past year. Not waiting for an answer, she took the material from Angel and handed it over to her mother. Do you mind, Amanda? I suppose not, Angel said. Yeah. Miriam took it right out of her lap and handed it over. It's not like she had a choice. She gave a start of surprise when Ruthie climbed up into her lap. Angel touched the dark, silky hair and was enchanted. Little Ruth was soft and cuddly, with pink cheeks and bright brown eyes. Angel felt her heart grieve. What would her own child have looked like? She blotted out the horrible memory of Duke and the doctor and savored Ruthie's affection. The child chattered like a little magpie, and Angel nodded and listened. I really hate all the descriptions of this little Ruthie. It's like she's not even a real child. She's a little magpie. And she just keeps asking these questions that are very convenient for making Angel think about herself and her worldview. I feel like that's very common in evangelical art. Little children are used to push beliefs and messages because they're so innocent. They just have no trouble believing, and we should all be like a child and believe. Glancing up, Angel encountered Michael's gaze. He wants children, she thought, and the thought hit her solid in the pit of her stomach. What if he knew she couldn't have them? Would his love for her die then? She couldn't hold his gaze. Elizabeth is able to sew clothes for Angel within a couple of days. So there you are, Miriam said, swinging the gate open. I told Mama I knew where to find you, she said, wagging her finger at her baby sister. Stooping over, she chucked Ruthie's chin. Chucked? Does that mean like... I don't even know. Oh, that's the other thing about these Altmans. They're always chucking each other and cuffing each other and swatting each other. Like, those are such good examples of how this family has no boundaries. Ruthie says, I'm with Mandy. Mandy, she said, straightening, her eyes dancing over Angel. Well, Mandy's working. Angel lifted the small carrot from the basket. She's helping. Miriam sent Ruthie to report back to Mama and knelt to work with Angel. "It suits you better," she remarked, thinning bean plants. "What does?" Angel asked tentatively. "Mandy," Miriam said. "Amanda just doesn't seem right somehow." That is so rude. "My name was Angel." "Really?" Miriam said, raising her eyebrows dramatically. She shook her head, eyes twinkling. "Angel doesn't fit you either." "Would hey you do?" Miriam chucked a dirt clod at her. "I think I'll call you Miss Priss," she decided. Great. So now, not only is Michael renaming Angel all over the place, but so is Miriam. I want to know what Angel wants to be called. Can we just figure that out and then everybody can just call her what she wants to be called? This next part is kind of weird, but when Elizabeth was fitting Angel for the clothes, she had to undress in front of Elizabeth, and she was wearing Tessie's old undergarments, and she felt embarrassed by it. So Elizabeth made her like some fancy underwear, a beautiful camisole and pantalettes. And so Angel feels super awkward and embarrassed. She tries to give them to Miriam and asks her to give them back to her mom. But then Miriam gets really mad at her because she says that it's going to hurt her mom's feelings and that her mom was just trying to be nice. And she tells Angel, "Well, if you want to hurt my mom's feelings, fine, but you have to do it. I'm not going to do it for you." And Miriam just gets really preachy in this whole section to Angel. "You don't know what to make of us, do you?" Miriam said. "Sometimes you look at me so strangely. Was your life so very different from mine?" "More different than you could ever imagine," Angel said bleakly. "Mama said it's good to talk things out." Angel arched a brow. "I wouldn't think to discuss my life with a child." "I'm 16, hardly that much younger than you. Age has nothing to do with years in my business." "It's not your business anymore, is it? You're married to Michael. That part of your life is over." Angel looked away. "It's never over, Miriam." "Not when you carry it around like so much baggage." Angel gave her a startled look. She laughed mirthlessly. "You and Michael have a lot in common." He had told her the same thing once. Neither one of them could understand. "You didn't just walk away and say things had never happened. They had, and they left deep, raw, gaping wounds. Even when the wounds were healed, there were scars. Just walk away and forget," she mocked. "It's never that simple." Miriam toyed with a blade of hay and changed the subject. "I imagine it would take a great deal of effort, but wouldn't it be worth it? It always catches up with you. Maybe you just don't have enough faith yet in Michael." Ugh, this kid. Angel didn't want to discuss Michael, especially with a girl like this one, who was far better suited for him than she was. Okay, so this is the point in the story where this 16-year-old girl is seen as totally old enough to marry these super grown men. "I was walking the other morning and saw a cabin," Miriam said. "Do you know who lives there?" "Michael's brother-in-law, Paul. His wife died coming west." "Is he older or younger than Michael?" "Younger." Her smile was playful. "How much younger?" Angel shrugged. "In his early 20s, I guess." She could see where this was going and didn't like it. "Is he handsome?" Miriam persisted. "I suppose to a virginal young girl, anyone without warts and buck teeth would be handsome." Miriam laughed. "Well, I am 16. Most girls are married by now, and I haven't even had a beau on the horizon. Naturally, I'm interested in who's available. I have to find a groom, so I can wear all those pretty unmentionables Mama's made for me and packed away in my trunk." I was curious about this claim Miriam made, that most girls her age were married. So I did some research, and it was kind of hard to find definitive answers, but I did find this interesting Teen Vogue article that I wanted to read a paragraph from. Around the middle of the 19th century, though it was still fairly common, more people began to view child marriage negatively. A Massachusetts law from 1852, so 2 years after when this book takes place, made it a crime to take a girl from her father's home and marry her without his permission, in part because the legislature believed that early marriage robbed families of the contributions children were expected to make to their households until a certain age, which legally meant until age 21. So from what I could tell, it was actually probably not very likely that most girls her age were already married. So I just wanted to point that out. Thinking of this sweet girl with Paul disturbed Angel greatly. Pretty things don't mean very much, Miriam. They really don't. Wait for someone like Michael. She could scarcely believe she had said it. There's only one Michael, Amanda, and you've got him. What's Paul like? The opposite of Michael. So that would mean ugly, weak, glum, and irreverent? That's not funny, Miriam. You're worse than Mama. She won't tell me the least little thing about men. There's not much to know. They all eat, defecate, have sex, and die, Angel said without thinking. You're really bitter, aren't you? Angel winced inwardly. This girl couldn't possibly understand, not without having experienced Duke. This girl should stay innocent, find a young man, marry him as a virgin, bear his children, and have a family just like the one she came from. She didn't need to be polluted. Ugh. Don't ask me anything about men, Miriam. You wouldn't like what I would tell you. I hope a man looks at me someday the way Michael looks at you. Angel didn't tell her that men had been looking at her like that for longer than she cared to remember. It didn't mean anything at all. Ugh, I hate this part. Papa says I need a strong man who'll keep a firm hand on me, Miriam said. But I want a man who needs me too. I want someone who can be tender as well as strong. Angel studied Miriam as she sat dreaming in the stall about her Prince Charming. Maybe things would have been different if Michael had met Miriam first. How could he have helped but love her? She was vivacious, unsullied, and devout. Miriam had no ghosts, no devil on her back. Miriam stood and brushed the hay from her skirt. I'd better stop dreaming and help Mama with the wash. She bent and put the camisole and pantalettes on Angel's lap. Why don't you try these things on before you make up your mind? I wouldn't hurt your mother for anything, Miriam. The girl's eyes teared up. I didn't think you could. She left. So if Angel is the age of a high school senior, then Miriam is only the age of a sophomore. And Angel's feeling jealous of her, kind of, and thinking that she would have been a better match for Michael. So inappropriate. Super gross. Michael is able to convince John Altman to stay in California rather than go on to Oregon. And he lets them have part of his property. I can't remember if he sells it or gives it to them. Doesn't really matter. But he and John build a cabin secretly as a surprise for Elizabeth, the Altman mom. And so Miriam is really excited that they're staying, partly because she thinks that Paul is handsome, and partly because she really likes Angel and wants to keep becoming friends. And Angel feels really attached to the Altmans now, especially Elizabeth, Miriam, and the littlest one, Ruthie. And this cabin that they've built is only 2 miles away from Michael's cabin, but for some reason, Angel feels like she's losing them, even though they're technically still on their property. She's just really, really afraid to open herself up to love and care about people because of what's been done to her in the past. Angel had sworn she would never love anyone, and now it was happening in spite of her. Miriam, little Ruth, Elizabeth, and now Michael. Every time she looked at him, he pierced her heart. She wanted to crush the feelings, but still they came, slowly finding their way. Duke was right. It was insidious. It was a trap. It grew like ivy, forcing its way into the smallest cracks of her defenses, and eventually it would rip her apart, if she let it, if she didn't kill it now. There's still a way out, came the dark voice counseling her. That's Satan's voice. Tell him the worst of what you've done. Tell him about your father. That'll poison it. That will stop the pain growing inside you. So she decided to confess everything. Once Michael knew everything, it would be finished. The truth would drive a wedge in so deep between them, she would be safe forever. So, content warning, incest. Another thing that Rivers has written as part of Angel's past is that her biological father came to her brothel when she was 16, and she recognized him, and instead of telling him that they were related, she chose to have sex with him. And it was in order to get revenge on him for hurting her mother, because when she was a child, he left her mother and it broke her mother's heart. And I don't know, I almost don't even know what to say about this. Like, why? Francine Rivers, why? It's just such an extreme thing to write, and I'm just like, what's the purpose, truly? Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to say. If anyone has thoughts about it, put it down in the comments, but the reason I told you that is because that is what she confesses to Michael. This story of what happened with her father. Michael felt sick. God, is there a sin this woman hasn't committed? And God says, no. And like, okay, I get that she did it on purpose. That's what Rivers wrote. But also, she is a victim of human trafficking. She was 16 at the time. A 16-year-old cannot consent to sex with an adult. I know that the laws of consent were different in 1850. I don't know. Just seems like a really, really ridiculous part. And this whole book is ridiculous, and I hate it, and there's a lot more to go. They finish their conversation. He's upset, but he ultimately accepts it. He actually makes her a gift that kind of has to do with something that she shared from her childhood. She went back inside and sat down because she was too weak to stand. She destroyed his dreams, and he made her wind chimes. When he came in, she served him supper. And then she thinks, I love you, Michael Hosea. I love you so much, I'm dying of it. She was trembling and embarrassed. Where was her calm, her control? He was shattering it with tenderness. Combing his fingers into her hair, he lifted her head back. He saw the fear in her eyes. I promise to love and cherish you, to honor and sustain you, in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, in the bad that may darken our days, in the good that may light our way. Is that like a little poem he just made up? Tirza, beloved, I promise to be true to you in all things until I die, and even beyond that, God willing. She stood staring at him, shaken to the core. And what have I to promise you? His eyes lit with gentle humor. To obey? Is that supposed to imply that that was a joke? It's not a joke, though. He lowered his mouth to hers. When he kissed her, Angel was lost in a wilderness of new sensations. It had never felt like this. Warm and wonderful, exciting and right. None of the old rules applied. She was dry ground, soaking in a spring rain, a flower bud opening to the sun. Michael knew and gently coaxed her with tender words flowing over her like the sweet balm of Gilead, healing her wounds. And she flew, Michael with her, into the heavens. Earthbound once more, Michael smiled. You're crying. I am? She touched her cheek and found a single tear. Don't look at me like that, he said, kissing her. It's a good sign. But when Michael awakened in the morning, Angel was gone. Cliffhanger number 2. Oh my god. Whew. All right, well, we made it through part 2. Part 3 will be on the way. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.